You may recognize our guest today thanks to his active online presence. Tech-savvy, he uses social media to bring his followers to the scene of collisions across Ontario, demonstrating the dangers of distracted driving. I'm here now with Sergeant Carrie Schmidt of the Ontario Provincial Police. Thank you so much for joining us today, Carrie.
Thanks for having me. This is an honor.
So you are with the OPP's Highway Safety Division. Can you tell us about what it is you do on a daily basis?
So Highway Safety Division is part of the OPP all across the province. I'm based here in the Greater Toronto area, and my job as a media relations officer is to kind of communicate and provide guidance and messages to the public, to the media, so they have an understanding of what's going on at scenes. From traffic safety issues that we deal with on an ongoing basis to collisions and wrecks and tragedies that we're dealing with all the time. I try to get as much messaging out into the public domain as I can, so people have an understanding of the consequences of maybe such a simple decision as picking up your cell phone or being in a hurry and driving aggressively. What can happen as a result of that. Obviously, we're out there doing enforcement as well, but for me, public education and awareness is so important, and hopefully with that messaging we can change a few drivers' behaviors.
So part of your job involves actually going to the scenes of these collisions, and so I would ask, what would you say is the most common type of collision that you're seeing?
Well, we investigate in excess of 70,000 crashes every single year. And you might think that they're only going to happen in snowy, wintry conditions or maybe late at night. But we get crashes that happen in ideal conditions, dry roads, sunny skies, when everything is working great on weekends, when people are relaxed and maybe not thinking about their surroundings as much, and they're kind of engrossed in the scenery and the distractions around them. But I think some of the root causes that we see all too often are these inattentive drivers. Now, that could be because they're distracted, because they have a cell phone in their hands. But if they have a car full of people as well, they may be, engrossed in a conversation and in some sort of dialogue, looking around and looking back and not looking where they're going. We all think we're very good multitaskers and that we can do multiple things at once, and in some situations maybe we're able to accomplish several tasks concurrently, but when we're multitasking, we're only switching from one task to another. And so if that multitasking is driving and on your cell phone, for that moment in time when you're actually looking at your cell phone, you're not looking at where you're driving. And so you can't do two things at once. You can switch back and forth quickly, but when we're actually looking down at our phone and something happens in the road in front of us, that's when tragedies can strike. And
it can happen in an instant.
In an absolute instant. Most collisions, you may think that a crash when two cars collide takes maybe seconds for it to complete. But in all actuality, the crash is over within about 200 to 300 milliseconds, like a third of a second, the crash is over. And the time that you kind of adjust and try to prepare, if you actually see what's going on, human factors have a huge part to play in that as well. So perception reaction times and how long it takes for you to recognize that there's a threat and take evasive actions to avoid that threat. And if you're coming in to that scene late because you were distracted, you're so far behind, you're not going to be able to catch up. And usually, by the time you realize you're going to be involved in a collision, it's too late.
What are some general tips that you would give to drivers in order to drive safely on highways?
Well, when we talk about road safety, we have already identified the leading causes of death and injury on our highways. The big four, we call them all the time. And that's aggressive driving, impaired driving, distracted or inattentive driving, and people not wearing their seatbelts. Those are the four leading causes of death and injury. And so putting on your seatbelt doesn't seem like an issue, but it's amazing how many people are not buckled up. Passengers in backs of vehicles. If you're driving in a taxi or a public transit, you're not buckled up, and you have options. If you're on an Uber or a ride-sharing car, you may not want to put your seatbelt on because you're in the back seat. You think you're all cocooned in there. But if you're involved in a collision, you're going to become a projectile and you're going to go flying through that cabin, coming in contact with other occupants who may be buckled, and maybe being ejected as well, and that can cause serious injuries. Aggressive driving, being in a hurry, following too close. When you follow someone at such a short distance because you're either trying to push them out of the way to get them to move over, or you're trying to get around them, that following distance is your safety time, is your distance that you can adjust if something happens.
Right.
And when you're behind someone just a couple of meters, you don't have any time to react. And if something happens quickly in front of them, by the time they hit the brakes, you're going to be right into the back of them.
Right.
Distracted driving is obviously one of the biggest issues we see all the time, and impaired driving as well, alcohol or drugs. And those drugs can be prescription drugs, can be illicit drugs or over-the-counter drugs, and people who use a combination of drugs and alcohol. Impairment is such a huge concern. And when you see someone who's impaired, they're weaving all over the highway. When you see someone who's on their phone and distracted, they're weaving all over the highway. Or even people that are falling asleep and being fatigued. Those are all big issues. It really comes down to your mindset and your attitude as to what is happening in your vehicle, what's happening in your body, and are you able to have your full attention on the task of driving.
With it being the month of September, students will no doubt be heading back to school. What tips would you give to students who sort of may be getting to school as pedestrians to remain safe on their way to school? Well,
pedestrian safety and bicycle safety is very important as well, because they are vulnerable road users.
Right.
If you're driving a motor vehicle, you have a protective safety cage of steel and metal and airbags and seatbelts. But as a cyclist or as a pedestrian, you have no protection at all. And it doesn't matter, even if you have the right of way and you're doing everything right, if someone hits you, you're the one who's going to pay the ultimate price. So even when you have the crossing signal telling you to cross the street, are you still looking back and forth and making sure the cars are stopping, getting eye contact with the other motorists? Because very often, drivers who are coming to an intersection, if they're waiting to make a right-hand turn, they're looking left. They're not looking where they're going. And you may be standing right in front of that vehicle and they're looking somewhere else. So it's so important as a pedestrian to get that eye contact with the driver so they acknowledge that you're crossing in front of them. Having that spatial awareness. We see a lot of people using earphones and looking down at their devices, and there's nothing illegal about walking and texting or walking and being distracted, but it's your own personal safety. We've seen people walk right into traffic, crossing a street without ever looking up, and traffic is moving by in front of them, and that is going to be a problem. So having that spatial awareness around you, always knowing in front of you, beside you, around you, just like in a vehicle, as a pedestrian, before you step off that curb, is it safe? And even if you're on the sidewalk, always looking around to watch for hazards that might be coming in any direction.
So everyone's got a responsibility, a role to play in terms of staying safe.
We share the road. It's a shared responsibility with everybody. So when it comes from transport trucks to passenger vehicles to motorcycles and then bicycles and pedestrians, we're all shared road users. We all have rights to be there. We all have to realize that driving and using those roads is a privilege. It's a privilege that can be taken away, but it is a responsibility of everybody to do their part to make sure we all get to go home. Because we all have our own agendas. We're all in a hurry. We all want to get home in time for dinner. We know how long it takes to get home. And the moment,
on a good day.
On a good day. and the moment that there's a traffic jam or a car crash, something that delays us, now we're behind schedule. And now we start being frustrated, we start taking chances, and that's where people can get themselves into trouble. And not just with the law, but with themselves and with other motorists if they're involved in a wreck. So using navigation, I know I use navigation tools all the time to tell me where I'm going and how long it's going to take to get there. But if you ever try that and you realize that your arrival time to home or work is going to be late, there's very little you can do to actually shave off minutes from your estimated arrival times. And I think the best thing is to just have that peace and that calm, and call ahead, tell your boss or your loved one that you're going to be late, and then you'll get there when you get there. Trying to make up precious minutes by speeding and driving aggressively is only going to get you into trouble down the road.
how can our viewers connect with you?
Well, do you know what? They can follow me all the time. We are on our social media. You can follow me on my Instagram and Twitter and Facebook pages under Sergeant Kerry Schmidt.
Okay.
You can follow us on the OPP. There's so much information that we're trying to communicate, and we love to share and connect with our listeners and viewers. So, please follow me and come visit me if we're ever at community events, and hopefully we don't meet on the highways in times of crisis.
Yes.
But please be careful out there.
Okay. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Kerry. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me.
Marta, back to you.